I think people are of goodwill. I don't think there's any interest in us delaying these tough conversations. And so we want this to be productive. We want this to be a productive week.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was House Financial Services Committee Chairman Patrick McHenry on those debt limit negotiations. We're now less than 2 weeks away from the Treasury's default deadline. So for more on this, let's talk to Republican Congressman David Joyce, who joins us now from Capitol Hill. He represents Ohio's 14th District and is a member of the House Appropriations Committee. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So you heard Patrick McHenry here. Do you agree that both sides are working in good faith on this debt limit?
Yes, thanks for having me, Caitlin. I do believe that we are working in good faith, and we're trying to get to something that will have a consensus of, for certain, 218 Republicans, but also I think we'll be able to get something where even some Democrats might come over, and that's the way D.C. should work.
Congressman, you mentioned that. I mean, the idea of having Democrats on board, could you imagine a scenario in which Kevin McCarthy has to cut a deal that requires Democratic support, or do you think he needs something that gets the majority of Republicans?
Well, I think at the end of the day, you're trying to craft something that's the 218 Republicans will get on board with. But again, hopefully it's such a good bill that others will join as well and realize this is in the best interest of our country to put these requirements in place and to lift the debt ceiling and move forward.
I know you were supportive of Kevin McCarthy when he was running for Speaker. How would you assess how he's been navigating this challenge?
Yeah, Kevin's done a wonderful job as a Speaker to be able to sit down and put all variety of people with different viewpoints into a room and let the conversation go where it may, and building a consensus to try to get something that everybody can go back to their respectful groups and constituents and talk about what we're doing and why we're trying to do these things now and move the country forward. We can't continue on the road we're on with the spending. We have to start doing something about containing the spending, because while we're receiving record revenues, we're also continuing to spend at record rates. And the inflation at home has not been cured for anybody in my district.
Can we talk about some of the sticking points in this legislation? The House obviously passed a bill. Is there anything in there that you would be willing to give up for the sake of a broader negotiation?
Well, I think it's premature to talk about giving anything up because we're the only game in town. We passed the bill. The Senate's done nothing. And the president for 97 days has sat on his hands. And so we've talked about getting to this point. Everybody knew this was going to be a date set certain at some point. Treasury Secretary Yellen has moved that date up, obviously, to June 1st. But remember, before we passed this bill, it was mid-July. It was going to be August. Now it's moved up. Okay, so we stand ready, willing, and able to put together something that will serve the best interests of the people we represent. And we're waiting for the Senate and we're waiting for the president. But I think in this case, it's specifically the president to start talking realistic numbers with Kevin, the Speaker, so we could start putting together a bill that works.
And to that point about that House-passed bill, I mean, some Republicans, including those from the Freedom Caucus, are demanding that these debt ceiling negotiations pause until the Senate actually passes the Republican bill. I mean, that doesn't seem realistic. What do you say to them?
No, it's not realistic because, as we all know, the Senate is where good ideas and bills go to die. We're in a position where we put together something that is actually worthwhile, and we would hope that the Senator Schumer and his group would entertain it, but they haven't. But I think it's been focused from the get-go that these discussions are between the president and Speaker McCarthy, and that's what's going to take place in a few minutes, and hopefully become some realistic top-line numbers in which we can continue to appropriate and move the country forward.
And there's been some talk of using the 14th Amendment, bypassing Congress altogether. What would you make of that kind of scenario?
I don't think it's realistic at this point in time because obviously you're going to be subject to legal challenges. And as we all know, the market doesn't like legal challenges or uncertainty. The market likes certainty, and we need to keep the market focused on doing the things that they need to do instead of worrying about whether or not the 14th Amendment will be held to be constitutional and used in this manner. I think it's more important that as President Biden has been down this road before, as a senator and as a vice president, and now as a president. Ball's in his court. He knows that we're standing here ready, willing, and able to work. let's start with realistic numbers and get moving.
Congressman, I want to switch gears a little bit because you are on the Ethics Committee. You are chairing a special referral, essentially, an investigation into George Santos. You voted to refer this Democratic-sponsored resolution that would want to expel Santos. That was referred to your committee. Some of your Republican colleagues voted present. Why did you vote the way that you did? And also, I know that you can't explain kind of the details of the investigation so far, but if you could give us kind of a wider parameters of where things stand in that committee.
Well, first off, I've always voted present when the vote has been about the subject matter in which the committee was going to be entertaining. In this case, if there was just a motion to expel, I'd have voted present for that too, because that would go to the subject matter. On this, it was, for whatever reason, a re-referral to the Ethics Committee, which is presently entertaining something, and we'll continue to do our job and let the Department of Justice do theirs.
And to that note, I mean, typically the Ethics Committee pauses on their investigations if the DOJ picks it up. That's not the case here. Can you explain why that is? Do you have more on your plate in terms of the scope of the investigation than the Justice Department does?
Well, the Justice Department in this case moved fairly quickly, but I will bet you that there'll be a superseding indictment at some point in the future, while they move forward on their case. But for our case, justice takes time. I didn't put any time limits on the investigation, and a bifurcated hearing in which DOJ will handle their matters and ethics will handle their matters that fall within their purview is consistent with what we've done all along. A lot of times the allegations of which DOJ would take it on would be purely criminal. And members have sat in session and been part of this. They've been stripped of their committees after they're indicted, but they've still been allowed to the due process of sitting here as a member until they're finally either guilty or found guilty, and then they're removed from Congress.
All right, we will keep an eye on that investigation as well as these debt limit negotiations. That one has a tighter deadline than yours does. Congressman David Joyce, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Caitlin.